Well, hello, friends and fellow pioneers. Today I have a special treat for you because this is not our our standard topic that we normally cover, but as being pioneers in faith, Dr. Miles Jones really gets a high medal for this. He's been pioneering in researching the origins of the Messianic Church, the original believers, and he came across some exciting discoveries on the origins of mountain music, of bluegrass music, that we would like to share with you today. And you notice my background. I am at the 25th annual Gospel Bluegrass Festival happening in Grapeland, Texas. It kicks off the official Bluegrass Festival kicks off on Thursday. So if you're anywhere within driving distance or you want to come check out what's happening here, come join us. We're here for early classes and workshops, enjoying the fellowship and the collaboration of people sharing their knowledge. And so I wanted to bring Dr. Miles Jones on because he is the author of Messianic Church Arising, and in his research he had some discoveries about the original music. So I will let you, Dr. Miles, share with us what those exciting discoveries were and what got you into this work.
Well, thanks. I'm very excited to be here, and I am going to be at the Bluegrass Gospel Festival. I'll be leaving Friday to come over there to Grapeland. So I'm very excited about it. But it was really my research into the Messianic Church that got me interested in it. So I'm going to read some to you from my book, The Messianic Church Arising, which talks about the origin of it. Most people that write about the origins of bluegrass gospel music, and let's get this straight for one thing: bluegrass gospel came first. Bluegrass music, as a generic style, evolved from bluegrass gospel music, and then country evolved from that, and it's heavily influenced many other styles of music, like Celtic music, Cajun Zydeco, Mexican ranchero music. It's an incredibly, what would you call, innovative music, and has been since its origin. And this is, but most people don't know anything about its origin. And so I think many of our friends and fans of bluegrass gospel music will really appreciate this story. And it goes all the way back to St. Patrick. Now, we don't know that he was a musician, but hang on to your hats and we'll tell you how this evolved as gospel music first. Patrick was born about 389 in, in Britain. So we don't know that he had any Celtic blood, but what we do know is that he was ancestrally a messianic, a Jewish Christian messianic from the original church of Jesus Christ. In Hebrew, that name is Yeshua HaMashiach. But he was from the original church. And you may know some of that story. And I'll read to you what it says, how we know this. We know it from the Book of Leinster, which is the oldest book written in Irish. It says on page 353, Patrick was truly of the sons of Israel. When the children of Israel were scattered by Titus and Vespasian in bondage throughout the four quarters of the world, then did Patrick's stock come to Britain. So you may know the story from the Bible, how they were surrounded, and the angels appeared to them in Luke, and in Acts it refers to it, but they appeared to the believers in Jerusalem, the Messianic church, and said, when the armies of the prince, and that would be Titus, who was the prince of Caesar Vespasian and became Caesar himself later on. When the armies of the prince surround Jerusalem, leave, and they fled and went to Pella in Jordan. The entire church did. Some of them later came back. Some of them immigrated onto Europe, and some stayed in Pella. But that story is a really incredible one because it was that church, the early Messianic church that spread the word to all parts of the known world, including Europe, the continent of Europe, very early on, before the Roman Church and the other large churches really were on their feet yet. In fact, that was still happening in the time when St. Patrick was born. They just formed the Greco-Roman Church, and the Greco-Roman Church uh, didn't. You've heard of the Council of Nicaea, where Constantine invited all the bishops of the church to come and codify the faith and come up with a Christian creed called the Nicene Creed, and canonize the books of the Bible. And basically, he made Christianity a put it on a world stage as the official church of Rome. And he did not broke any competition with his church. So the Jewish Christian bishops, of which there were many, were not invited to the Council of Nicaea, which happened in 325, and that set the stage. So the Messianic Church of the Savior himself was declared heretic by this new church, this Greco-Roman church. And that explains many of the things that happened through the centuries and millennium and 2 millennium to follow. And it definitely plays a part in the history of St. Patrick and the church. So St. Patrick was captured as a boy, he was captured by raiders from Ireland. This is still a very wild and woolly time during the history of Britain. So he was captured by Irish raiders, taken to Ireland, where he basically was enslaved, and he worked as a shepherd to tend the flocks. Now, he was a Messianic Christian, but like many young people, he had drifted away from his faith. But he began to pray fiercely and often and constantly, and the fear of the Lord began to build and build and build in him, and he would wake up even before dawn to pray to God. And at one point, after several years, Yehovah told him, "Okay, it's time. I need you to leave, go back to Britain." He did that, and found passage over to Britain. And he spent the next several years studying the word in several languages, learning the languages of the Bible, Hebrew, Greek. He learned it in Gaelic because they did have a Celtic Bible. Remember the letter to the Galatians, one of the earliest churches? These were Gauls, and in a BC migration from Europe, they had entered Asia Minor and taken over a region that they still held in the first century at the time of Yeshua, the time of the Messiah. And it was called Galatia. So the letter to the Galatians was to this church, which was the Church of Gauls. And they were still in contact. They had copious contact with their fellow Gauls in southern France and their fellow Celts in Britain and Ireland and Scotland and other parts of the world. So they early on had that Celtic Bible, the Galatian type of Bible. And that's what he used. But he also used the Hebrew Gospels, which he also had and could read. But he knew Greek and Gaelic. And one of the markers of the Messianic Church is that it always put education on a very, very, very high premium. So at a certain point, Yehovah decided he was ready, and he tapped him to go back to Ireland and bring the word to the heathen. And he was very much like the early church. In fact, this is what was written about him. The Celtic Church was an outpost of first century apostolic Christianity, which was planted in 70 AD by Messianic Jews from Jerusalem. No wonder they did the same things the apostles did. They had the same kind of Christianity the apostles had. So the Celtic Church gives us the clearest picture outside of the New Testament of the early apostolic church. So he's talking about 70 AD is the event where the Romans surrounded Jerusalem, and the church, the Messianic church, was warned by the angel to flee to Pella. Well, not everybody listened, right? Some did and some didn't. And those that were taken captive by the Romans were sent in bondage to the frontiers of their Empire, which was in Britain at that time, where they were resettled to form a barrier between the savage barbarians and the Romans. So that was their use. So that's where when Patrick's ancestors came to Britain. So he was ancestrally a messianic Jew, and that he had the same religion of the original church, and it showed because he's a man of an intense faith, and he showed in the daily miracles that he brought. One of the first things he did in Ireland was he had an encounter with King Alphemus. King Alphemus had gotten up that morning and discovered that his son had been killed. His son had died during the night, and his daughter had drowned in the river when she went to bathe that morning. So he lost both of his children in the course of a few hours. But he had actually heard of St. Patrick. His miraculous healings had come before him. He was known as the Great Reviver. During his ministry, he revived as many as 60 people from the dead. And these are abilities that spiritual gifts that he passed on to his apostles that came after him, like Columba, Aidan, Columbanus, and others. They were able to raise people from the dead as well. But King Alphemus called for St. Patrick, and he came, and he raised both of his children from the dead. And obviously that made a huge impact on King Alphemus. But it was like this for all the Celtic countries. They fell like dominoes before St. Patrick, which is really the clearest proof you have that the stories of his daily miracles were true, because these were fierce barbarians. They weren't going to put up with anything that they didn't have strong evidence of. They were just not the kind of people to submit. So the fact that they bought into this and became Celtic Christians, and they became a Celtic church, was incredible. Because during his time, Patrick inspired the building of 700 churches. He ordained 5,000 priests and consecrated 350 bishops. And he preached the Bible as the sole, I'm quoting here, Patrick preached the Bible as the sole authority for founding the Irish church. The training centers he founded, which later grew into colleges and large universities, were all Bible schools. Famous students of these schools: Columba, who brought Scotland to Christ; Aidan, who won pagan England to the gospel; and Columbanus with his successors, who brought Christianity to Germany, France, Switzerland, and Italy. So this was a lot more than just, Ireland. The Celtic Church was wider, spreading into the continent of Europe. So the people mainly a Celtic affair, although they weren't exclusive. But this is, at this time, 99% of Europe was illiterate, totally illiterate, and yet the Messianic Church was outstanding because of one thing: they had an extremely high degree of literacy and learning in several languages. His apostles knew Hebrew, Greek, often Latin, but Gaelic for sure. And they could communicate with the people and teach to them from the Word. Now, this was before the Roman Church's Bible, which is called the Latin Vulgate. They used the Itala, which was the earliest compilation of the Gospels, which came from the Hebrew Gospels, by the way, and the Tanakh, which was written in Hebrew, and the received text of the Bible, written by Lucian of Antioch. The Itala was about 150 AD, and the Lucian's Greek Bible, which is called the received text of the Bible because it was received as the authentic word by every church in Christendom. So it's called the received text, or the Textus Receptus, about 290 AD. And this was before any of the Roman Church Bibles were produced, like the Latin Vulgate, for example. So these Bibles were what they used. The church later on, they basically took over his ministry, if you will. They appropriated it, and the fact is that Patrick never set foot in Rome, had nothing to do with Rome. In fact, opposed them in many, many ways. They used the Hebrew year date as date. They worship a Christian Passover, if you will. They started their days in the evening in the Hebrew style. They honored the feast days, they studied the Bible in Hebrew. So it was very much a first century church, a messianic church, the Celtic Church was. And it was later on, by force, basically the centuries later, when the Roman priests came in to Ireland and the Celtic countries, they united themselves with the nobility, and by military force they crushed the Celtic Church and drove the Celtic clergy out. Now this is highly significant because any of the Celts would tell you that the reason for their life of daily miracles, which it was because they practiced what is called laus perennis. That's Latin for perpetual praise. So, and they were imitating what was done in the temple at Jerusalem under Solomon, where they had people constantly 24/7 engaged in perpetual praise of God in order that his Shekinah glory would remain among them. And that is what they credit their life of daily miracles in the Celtic Church to. And it certainly was that ongoing in all of the centers where they were. These centers, like in Iona in Scotland, and Whitfield in England, Bangor, in Ireland. These were all, they became universities, but remember that this time, 99% of all the people in Europe were illiterate. They were deep into the Dark Ages because knowledge in any other language but Latin had been forbidden. And so this was the light of the Western world, the light of civilization in the Western world, because they had contact with Christendom all over the world. And they had books from all over the world in their library. So it really was the last outpost of civilization during the Dark Ages of Europe. And when it was crushed, that was a terrific blow because the age of daily miracles came to an end. Now the Celts, they didn't just fold and say, okay, we'll do it your way. They clung to their faith. What they did was they went up into the mountains where they would not be bothered or oppressed by the militant Catholicism that had overtaken the country. And they took with them, and this is really important, they took with them their unique musical instruments. Remember, I told you that they had been practicing laus perennis, perpetual praise. That means 24/7, and they maintained this for more than 3 centuries, and oftentimes they had hundreds of people at a time. They were praying, they were singing, and they were playing music to Jehovah during this time. This is the origin of bluegrass gospel, right there. And they brought whatever instruments they had. They developed instrumentation. This is where that incredible innovation that they brought to music came from. And when the military moved in and kicked them out and crushed the Celtic Church, they went up in the mountains. They took these unique musical instruments, and they were obviously the acoustic guitar, which was pretty much a very new thing at the time, and all of these things developed with them. But the auto harp was one of them, which is a small harp that can be played on the lap or leaned against the shoulder. The banjo, which came from North Africa. The mandolin is another one. These are very unique instruments. They weren't all originated by them, but by the Messianics or the Celts, but they all came together in that type of music. The accordion was another one, and the accordion was definitely a part of the earliest bluegrass music, like Bill Monroe and the Mountain Gospel Boys, the Bluegrass Gospel Boys, they were called. They used accordion. It was widely used in the early days of bluegrass gospel. Not so much anymore. But it's still used in ranchero music and in Cajun Zydeco music, but it was originally part of it. They used the dobro, which is a guitar with a steel casing in the chamber, so it gets more resonation of the music. This was a bluegrass instrument that was used. And they were very innovative. So they were the very first when in the 1900s when they began to record this music. They were the first to pick up on the electric guitar and the slide steel guitar, for example, which actually came from Hawaii. And so they were incredibly innovative and moving from acoustic to electric, for example, in their music. They really led the world in that and created new genres of music. So these Celts went up into the mountains taking their really unique music with them, and they were still under oppression. But when the time came where the new world was opening up after 1492 and Columbus, who was also a messianic, by the way, they began to immigrate to the new world in the colonies. And probably because they're used to it and there was still oppression in the new world, it was religious freedom for me, but not for you. So they migrated into the hills again, the Appalachians, and they were joined there by other groups that were basically Celtic in nature, the Irish, the Scots Irish, and English and German, many of which were Celtic in origin, and they joined them up there, and their incredible, unique form of music, bluegrass gospel, that had begun in the Celtic churches in the age of Laus Perennis, perennial praise and music and singing and praying to the Lord, that his kind of glory might rest with them. It went with them up into those mountains, and it remains an incredibly vibrant style of music even today. So, having learned this story, I started listening to it and was immediately captivated by it. But I think it's important to our friends and fans of bluegrass music to know that this is a messianic music that comes from the time of St. Patrick and the time of daily miracles, when the Shekinah glory of God came down to earth and lived with the Celtic Church, the Messianic Celtic Church, on this earth, and created a period of daily miracles that are still with us for those who hold tightly to the faith and follow it. And this is our music. So this is just a wonderful story to tell and a wonderful festival to be a part of. What do you think?
Thank you, Miles, for sharing all of your research. It's always very inspiring and just it's just mind blowing to hear some of the things that are not conventional history, right? The things that we don't normally hear about that happen in our faith, that happen in history. And one of the most captivating things that you said was really, I'm still chewing on that, the perpetual praise. Do you happen to know what that, you shared the Latin term, do you happen to know what that is in Hebrew also? Is that something that...
No, but I know it came from Hebrew. It came from Hebrew. I could find out, but I'll do that. But it did came from the practice in the temple at Jerusalem. Now the rest of the story is in the book, Messianic Church Arising, which you can purchase on writingofgod.com. And you can find it on Amazon too, but please purchase it from us, because we get like 3 times as much for our ministry, and it doesn't cost you anymore. So writingofgod.com. That's the place to go to get this story and the story of the survival of the Messianic Church, the original church of the Savior, of the Messiah.
Thank you, Miles. And I do have in the details, I have information about I have links to your website and to the festival also. And if anyone is, again, within driving distance, or you just really want to check out what's happening here, I'm at the 25th annual festival, Gospel Bluegrass Festival, and Dr. Jones is going to be joining us on Friday, and you can get to see him and hear more, ask him questions. I asked him to bring a few extra copies of his latest book, Messianic Church Arising. Jason did finish it cover to cover. I have not yet gotten to read it completely, but it's a very exciting work, and we did get to hear your presentation and watch it online also. And it's really inspiring to hear all the innovative things that the original Messianic believers were doing, and this just rich history that we have from the early church. And so if you have any questions, please comment, and I will do my best to get you an answer from Dr. Jones. One thing I wanted to
Or
ask
they
you,
can come
Dr.
to the
Jones,
festival. And I'll look forward to
absolutely. If
seeing you there.
you,
I'll be there for the weekend. So anytime you can
yes,
make
and
it out
so
there.
by the way, the festival kicks off officially on Thursday, but there are early, as you can hear, there's people coming and going. This morning, there were classes. So if you want to learn all the different instruments, there's classes for guitar and the banjo and the fiddle and different things like that. Jason and I really did not. We liked bluegrass, but I just really felt very inspired last year to search a gospel bluegrass festival in our area. And it actually was exactly this week last year when I just felt inspired to do that. And the festival was happening. So we came for the last day and made plans to come back this year for the full festival, because even though we're not super musically inclined and talented by nature, we really want to learn how to play more instruments and be able to worship ourselves anytime. And it's just we really appreciate and love string instruments, and there are some amazing teachers. If you want to learn, if you're a beginner, there are a lot of people here that would love to share with you how to get started in playing your instruments, and especially if you have a love for bluegrass, this is the place to be this week in Grapeland, Texas. So again, the information
I'll
is
see
the
you
link
there.
below. Yeah, so we'll see you here, and you can come and ask questions from Dr. Jones personally. Thank you, Dr. Jones, for joining us,
You're
and
welcome.
we'll see you on Friday.
All right.
May the Lord bless you and keep you and shine his face towards you, turn his countenance towards you, and give you shalom, peace. Yavarechecha Yehovah v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Yehovah panav v'lecha v'kuneka, Yisa Yehovah panav v'lecha v'yasem lecha shalom. That's the Hebrew version. Y'all be blessed, and we'll see you soon.
Shalom.
Bye-bye.